Air here is a thick, ancient thing, a breath held captive for centuries. It presses against my lungs, tasting of damp stone and forgotten prayers, of something metallic and profoundly old. This is my charge, my penance, my eternal vigil, to guard that which lies shackled beneath the Vatican, a secret so terrible it has been buried not just under layers of earth and rock, but under layers of silence, of doctrine, of sheer, petrifying terror. I am one of the custodians, though the title feels like a mockery. We are not keepers of knowledge, but of oblivion. We are the jailers, and our prisoner is something that defies all mortal understanding, something the Church has deemed too dangerous even to acknowledge in whispered sermons. My post is a vault of granite and iron, deeper than any catacomb, cold enough to numb the bone marrow. The walls weep moisture, and a permanent, shimmering film of condensation coats the ancient iron chains that disappear into the abyssal darkness, their ends presumably bound to whatever unspeakable thing slumbers there, or I should say, rested there. The rules, an elaborate parchment scroll meticulously pennied in Latin and various dead tongues, were my constant companion, my only tether to sanity. There are hundreds of them, each a safeguard, each a lesson learned through unspeakable cost. We are taught to commit them to memory, to absorb them into our very being, but never to vocalize them, never to give them a voice, a presence in this suffocating silence. But the silence, it breeds a peculiar kind of madness. Days bleed into weeks, marked only by the shifting glow of my oil lamp and the relentless drip of water echoing from unseen depths. My own breathing becomes a deafening roar. My thoughts, once neatly ordered, began to fray at the edges, unraveling into a ceaseless hum of paranoia and doubt. Was I truly guarding anything, or was this an elaborate, cruel psychological experiment? The sheer emptiness of it all, the complete lack of any sensation save for the oppressive weight of the rock above, made me question everything. Was the demon even real? Or was it just a story, a bogeyman to keep the custodians vigilant, perpetually on edge? That question, that insidious doubt, was the true insidious poison. It was a slow, creeping urge, a need to prove its existence, to shatter the unbearable monotony with something. The rules, etched in my mind, felt like ancient riddles, their purpose lost to time. I'd recite them silently, countless times a day, each syllable a familiar comfort. But one night, perhaps driven by an intolerable loneliness, perhaps by a nascent, dangerous curiosity, I paused. My breath misted in the frigid air. The iron chains, always shimmering with their own internal moisture, seemed to gleam with a faint, almost imperceptible warmth under my gaze. I remembered the very first one, the one taught before all others, the foundation of our absurd existence. Rule 1, Custodia aeterna est. Eternal is the custody. It always struck me as less of a command and more of a statement, a grim declaration. It was the absolute, the unchanging truth of this place. But what if it was more? What if the words themselves, divorced from the parchment, held a different power? I hesitated, the thought itself a transgression. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the crypt's impenetrable stillness. Every fiber of my being screamed no, but a deeper, darker part, the part that craved validation, yearned for release from the endless uncertainty, pushed me forward. My voice, unused save for the occasional muttered prayer, felt thin and reedy as it broke the silence. Rule 1, I whispered, the sound alien in the cavernous space. My lips felt dry, my tongue thick. Custodia aeterna est. The Latin, ancient and formal, felt heavy on my tongue. The words hung in the air, swallowed by the darkness. For a moment, nothing. My stomach clenched with a mixture of fear and profound foolishness. I had broken a cardinal rule for what? A childish test. I felt a flush of shame crawl up my neck. Then it happened. It wasn't a roar, not a tremor, not a thunderous clap. It was far more subtle, far more terrifying. From the inky depths where the chains vanished, a faint, almost delicate chime echoed. Like a tiny, polished bell struck once, or perhaps, as the summary so perfectly described, like teeth against glass. It was the sound of metal, yes, but not the heavy, groaning protest I might have expected. It was light, almost melodious, yet utterly chilling. It reverberated not just through the stone, but through the very marrow of my bones. My breath hitched, My oil lamp, usually steady, seemed to flicker, casting dancing shadows that writhed and stretched. The air, already thick, seemed to grow denser, colder, yet at the same time I felt a peculiar warmth emanating from the chains nearest to me. Not the warmth of my breath, but an internal heat, as if the metal itself had come alive, had listened. My eyes, wide with sudden, sickening realization, scanned the darkness. I saw nothing, of course. There was never anything to see, merely the unbroken expanse of shadow. But I felt it. I felt the demon lean. Yes, lean. Not a physical motion, but a palpable shift in the air, a presence that had been dormant, asleep in the abyss, now subtly, almost imperceptibly, alert. It was as if my words, mere sounds shaped by my tongue and lungs, had been a key turning in a lock, not of a door, but of its attention. The syllables had pierced its ancient slumber, reaching out like tendrils. I had sought to break the monotony, to prove its existence, and in doing so, I had confirmed its sentience, its terrifying awareness. I should have stopped when the first chime echoed, when the links warmed under my breath. I should have clamped my mouth shut, choked back the terror and the foolishness. But the sound, the warmth, the feeling of its gaze had seized me. A different kind of fear, one far colder than the crypt itself, began to bloom in my chest. This wasn't just a transgression, it was an awakening. The rules, once rote instructions, now felt like a desperate, ancient spell, each word a binding thread. And I, in my arrogance, had pulled one loose. The silence that followed was no longer empty. It was filled with the lingering resonance of that chime, with the lingering warmth of the chains, and with the undeniable, crushing weight of an immense, malevolent awareness. It was listening now. It was always listening, but now it knew I was here. I had called to it, however inadvertently, however foolishly. My heart pounded, not with simple fear, but with a profound, soul-shattering dread. Why did those words, that simple declaration of eternal custody, feel like a door? Because I now understood they weren't just a rule for me. They were a truth for it, and I had just reminded it. I feel its eyes on me now, even when I close my own. This chamber, deep beneath St. Peter's Basilica, a place forgotten by God and man, has always hummed with a specific kind of dread. But tonight, that hum is a vibration against my very bones, a nascent tremor that signals not merely discovery, but unveiling. I thought the rituals were safeguards, mere academic exercises in controlling ancient forces, but now I know they are just thinly veiled invitations. And I, in my hubris and my fear, extended an invitation far too early. The veil thins not by design, but by my own trembling hand, and something else has stirred. The air in this subcatacomb vault is always heavy, tasting of dust and the faint, sweet decay of forgotten centuries. Tonight, though, it feels different, charged. My breath catches in my throat, a dry rasp against the silence that presses in from all sides, a silence so profound it rings. My hands, usually steady as I navigate the treacherous arcana of the Liber Obscura Sacra, the very grimoire that dictated my presence here, the one I am meant to merely catalogue, never interpret, now tremble visibly. The parchment pages, brittle and whispering of unspeakable things, lay open before me, their forbidden script a map to a land I was never meant to visit. The instructions for the lamp of vigil, the simple iron oil lamp that sits on the stone altar before me, are absolute. At the 7th minute past midnight, when the shadow of the celestial apex aligns with the slumbering heart of the earth, and the veil between the realms of the quick and the eternally dreaming thins to a breath, then shall the sacred oil be fed to the wick. No sooner, no later. This timing, I had read, was critical. It wasn't merely about creating light in the dark. It was about synchronizing with a particular cosmic cadence, a fragile equilibrium that allowed for observation without interaction. The lamp, a beacon, a ward, a witness. I understood the theory, of course, the intricate dance of astrological alignments, subterranean ley lines, and the very specific vibrational frequency required to maintain the delicate barrier separating our waking world from the deep, unspoken strata below. But tonight, the weight of the past few weeks, the relentless study of texts that whisper of nomina non dicta, names not to be spoken, entities not to be acknowledged, had frayed my composure. The relentless shadows of the archives, the creeping suspicion that I was not alone in my research, that eyes older than the Vatican itself were watching my progress through the forbidden texts, had worn me down. Every creak of the ancient stone, every distant rumble of the city above, was magnified into an omen. My paranoia, a constant companion these days, was a suffocating shroud. As the heavy pendulum clock in the antechamber outside chimed its resonant, echoing peal marking the turn of the hour, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Midnight. The moment approached. My eyes darted to the clock face, its brass numerals gleaming faintly in the oppressive gloom. My hand, slick with nervous sweat, fumbled for the tinderbox. 1 minute passed. 2, 3. Each second stretched into an eternity, each tick a hammer blow against my skull. My mind raced, fragments of dire warnings from the Liber swirling like phantom moths. To awaken before the hour is to invite that which still slumbers, to feed the wick prematurely is to provide an ingress, a key turned in an unready lock. At 6 minutes past midnight, not 7, my hand, acting on a desperate, inexplicable impulse, a sudden, overwhelming urge to just get it done, to break the agonizing tension, struck the flint. A spark, then a tentative lick of flame caught the wick. The lamp flared, a tiny sun in the cavernous dark, and my breath hitched. I had done it. I had fed the lamp. But the flame, it wasn't right. It pulsed, yes, but not with the gentle, steady beat I had come to expect. This was a frantic, agitated dance. It didn't simply flicker, it fluttered. A series of rapid, staccato movements, each brief burst of light casting the shadows in the room into wild, prayer-like contortions. It was like a living thing, gasping for air or perhaps desperately signaling. A frantic code, a semaphore of silent agony or, God forbid, a wordless plea. My mind, still grappling with the sheer audacity of my premature action, tried to rationalize it as a draft, a sudden shift in the inert air of the vault. But there was no draft. The air was dead still. Then a chill, distinct and piercing, seeped into the chamber. It wasn't merely cold. It was a profound absence of warmth, an unnatural vacuum. And as I stared, mesmerized by the flame's frantic ballet, the polished brass grill slats of the lamp began to fog. Not from the heat of the flame, no, for the chill was deepening. This was something else. A pearlescent film, like breath on a winter morning, condensed on the metal, thick and opaque. But it wasn't my breath. I stood several feet back, frozen, watching in horror as the fog blossomed from the inside of the lamp, from behind the grill, from a space that should have been empty save for the flickering light. A breath, a long, slow, deliberate exhalation, visible now on the metallic surface. It was shallow, yet impossibly deep, utterly alien. I thought I was imagining it until the fog began to clear in patches, slowly, leaving behind not random streaks, but faint, lingering patterns, like the impression of a massive, unseen lung expanding and contracting. Then the sound. Faint at first, a low thrumming that I dismissed as the blood rushing in my ears. But it deepened, gaining an impossible resonance, vibrating through the very soles of my feet. Thump, 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 a slow, ponderous rhythm, echoing under St. Peter's Stone. Not above, not around, but beneath us. A heartbeat. A colossal, ancient pulse that seemed to reverberate from the very bedrock of the Vatican, from the deep foundations upon which this entire edifice was built. It wasn't the quick, frantic beat of a human heart, but something ponderous, geological, like the rhythmic churning of a subterranean engine, or the slow, inexorable pulse of an unimaginable leviathan trapped in the earth's abyssal depths. My rational mind, the academic, the meticulous researcher, screamed for an explanation. Seismic activity, subterranean machinery, but the Liber had prepared me for this in its own horrifying way. It spoke of deep slumbering things, of thresholds, of moments when the membrane between here and there becomes translucent. Velum temporis disrumpita, it had warned. The veil of time can be ruptured, and I, in my terrified haste, had ruptured it. I should have stopped when the flame began its unnatural dance. I should have smothered the wick the moment the fog appeared. I should have fled when that monstrous heartbeat began to drum its slow, terrible rhythm beneath my feet. But I couldn't. A morbid fascination, a terror-stricken curiosity, rooted me to the spot. My eyes were glued to the lamp, to the impossible breath that continued to bloom and fade on its grill. And then the soot. The lamp's flame, still fluttering frantically, began to smoke, a thin wisp curling upwards, blackening the glass chimney. But the soot didn't merely accumulate. As I watched, breathless, paralyzed, the black particulate matter began to coalesce, to shape itself with an eerie, dreadful intentionality. It wasn't an amorphous smudge. It was forming a pattern, coalescing into discernible lines. A palm. A vast, dark handprint, traced in absolute black against the cloudy glass, perfectly rendered, its fingers splayed, its thumb opposable, its sheer size suggesting something far, far beyond human scale. It pressed outwards from inside the lamp, a silent, terrible pressure against the glass, an undeniable imprint of a touch that should not be possible. What woke? That was the question that screamed through my mind, loud enough to drown out the infernal heartbeat. What primeval force, what entity of the profound deep, what unspeakable horror tied to the very foundations of this holy city had I disturbed by my single, foolish act? The Liber whispered of the Adumbratus, the shadowed ones, who dwell in the liminal spaces, feeding on the errant vibrations of premature summons. Was this it? Was this the consequence of my rush? The abrupt, unceremonious yank of a creature from its deep, patient slumber? The lamp, once a simple object of ritual, was now a window, a conduit. And through that window, something vast and ancient was now gazing back. My blood ran cold, colder than the breath that still misted the grill. I had not merely lit a lamp. I had struck a match in a cave filled with gunpowder, and the explosion was only just beginning to rumble. I am irrevocably linked to whatever now stirs beneath St. Peter's Stone. The whispers never truly cease in this place. They are not auditory, not yet, but a constant pressure against the eardrums, a reverberation in the very marrow of my bones. I am in the chamber now, the one they called locus horribilis in the forgotten texts, a term I once dismissed as mere dramatic embellishment. It is anything but. The air here is colder than the crypts above, thick with the exhalations of untold centuries, carrying the faint, metallic scent of dried blood and something else, something cloying and ancient, like ozone after a lightning strike, or the breath of a beast that has slept too long beneath the earth. This is where the Church, in its infinite, meticulous wisdom, chose to house its most potent failures, its most terrifying successes. I pace the circumference, my footsteps echoing with an unnerving resonance that suggests vast, empty spaces beyond these walls, despite the solid, unyielding feel of the Vatican bedrock. The walls themselves are the primary reason for my descent, not simple stone, but polished black marble, veined with sickly white, like petrified arteries. It hums with a latent energy absorbing light, transforming the faintest lantern glow into a struggling, impotent pulse. I run my gloved hand across the surface, feeling the chill seep through the leather, a chill that seems to originate not from temperature, but from a deeper, more profound absence. This isn't just a prison. It's a monument to an unholy lineage, an archive of shadows. I've been drawn to the inscriptions for days, deciphering the faded Latin, the archaic Greek, even older, unidentifiable glyphs that seem to writhe under my gaze. Each carving is a story, a desperate plea, a triumphant declaration. Here, the names of forgotten saints, known only to a select few in the sacred congregation for the doctrine of the faith, and even fewer outside it, stand alongside the demonic entities they were said to have bound. Dates stretch back, impossibly, to the early days of the Church, to the very foundation of Rome itself, though I suspect some of these chronological markers are purely symbolic, a way of anchoring the ephemeral to a tangible timeline. I trace the elegant, almost calligraphic script of a 5th-century exorcist, Father Sylvanus, whose methods involved prolonged starvation and recitations of the Liber Creationum, a grimoire I know only through whispered academic rumor, certainly not from any published Vatican index. Beside his name, the looping symbol of what I believe to be the demon, Malphars, a lesser entity, but one known for its cruel cunning. The sheer volume of these inscriptions is staggering. Thousands of names, dates, symbols, each a fragment of a larger, terrifying tapestry. I catalogue them meticulously in my mind, searching for patterns, for connections, for the keys to the forbidden knowledge I've dedicated my life to unearthing. I tell myself this is scholarly rigor, a pursuit of truth, but even as the thought forms, a cold dread coils in my stomach. It feels more like I am piecing together a ritual, a summons, unwitting and unwilling though I may be. I should have stopped when the names began to blur, when the ancient faces in my mind's eye seemed to watch me from the marble. But I kept reading, kept searching, compelled by an insatiable, dangerous curiosity. My fingers, numb from the cold and the sheer concentration, glide over an area that seemed at first glance like any other expanse of polished darkness. But then, a subtle difference. A texture that doesn't quite match the aged, softened edges of the surrounding carvings. It's too sharp, too distinct, too new. My breath catches in my throat. I lean in closer, shielding my lantern's beam from my own shadow. The difference is stark, undeniable. While the other inscriptions are worn, smoothed by centuries of dust and air, and perhaps the reverent, terrified touch of those who came before me, this groove gleams. It's a fresh cut, precise, as if etched with a jeweler's tool just yesterday, or perhaps even an hour ago. The edges catch the light, reflecting a faint, raw glimmer that feels utterly out of place in this ancient, timeless vault. My heart hammers against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Who could have done this? No one is permitted down here without the highest clearance, and certainly not with tools to deface these sacred, or profane, walls. The Vatican's security protocols for these hidden chambers are legendary, almost mythical in their impenetrability. And yet, here it is, an anomaly, a breach. My eyes fall to the carved letters, sharp and clean, startlingly legible in contrast to the faded script surrounding them. The language is English, stark and simple. My gaze freezes on the first letter, then the second, the third, until the full word blossoms before my horrified eyes. Whitlock. It is my surname. The world tilts. My surname here. On this wall, among the damned and the divine, the bound and the binding. This cannot be. A trick of the light, I tell myself, a figment of my paranoia. I rub my eyes, shake my head, willing the letters to change, to dissolve into some ancient cryptogram. But they remain, stark and undeniable, mocking my disbelief. Whitlock. My name. My family name, carved into the very stone of this subterranean purgatory. Beneath it, in equally precise, unnervingly fresh script, is a date, 1983. My mind screams. I was born in 1984. A year before I existed. A year before my first breath, before my parents even knew of my impending arrival, my name was etched into this wall, with a jeweler's precision. Not faded, not old, but gleaming new. Who wrote me into a past I hadn't lived. Who knew I would be here now, staring at my own predestined inscription. The realization hits me like a physical blow, stripping the air from my lungs. This isn't just a discovery. It's an unveiling, a horrific revelation of my own complicity in a narrative far older and more sinister than I could ever have imagined. I press my finger into the fresh groove of the letters, the cold marble biting at my flesh. A strange sensation spreads through me, not pain, but a deep, resonant vibration that seems to travel directly to the roots of my teeth. My tongue feels suddenly thick, numb, and then a distinct, unmistakable taste blossoms in my mouth. Iron. Raw, coppery, like blood, or like communion wine gone terribly, irrevocably wrong. It's the taste of sacrament perverted, of an unholy covenant. I should have stopped when my tongue felt numb, when the metallic tang filled my senses, warning me of the violation, of the trespass I was committing, not just upon the marble, but upon my own very being. But I didn't. I kept my finger pressed, compelled, as if the carving itself were drawing something from me or implanting something within. The chamber feels tighter now, pressing in on me from all sides. The ancient, oppressive silence is broken only by the frantic beat of my own heart, a drum solo announcing my unwilling arrival to a stage I never sought. The other names on the wall, the forgotten exorcists, the bound entities, they no longer seem distant historical figures. They are peers, fellow players. The very act of finding my name here, dated before my existence, means I am not just an observer, a scholar, but a participant. A character pre-written into a script, destined for an unknown, terrifying role. The forbidden knowledge I sought has found me, claimed me, and branded me. The irony is a bitter poison. I thought I was investigating the darkness. Instead, I am being woven into its very fabric. Every secret I've uncovered, every text I've translated, every clandestine journey into the deepest archives, it all leads to this moment, to this inscription, to my name, a fresh wound on the face of eternity. My reality, once so firmly anchored in logic and academic pursuit, shatters into 1,000 shards of terrifying possibility. I am not simply here. I was always meant to be here. And the taste of iron still lingers, a perpetual sacrament of my undoing. The crack was a betrayal, a minute laceration across the pristine surface of the outer containment. A hairline fracture, truly, no wider than a spider's silk, yet it spiderwebbed outwards from the central sigil, a perfect imitation of a shattered windowpin across the beeswax stigmata. The official protocols, those meticulously pennied documents compiled by generations of men far more cautious than I, were unequivocal. Should any compromise be observed in the primary hermetic seal, type III, wax-infused apotropaic, the entire unit is to be replaced in situ without exposure of the internal matrix. Contact archival custodians for full recertification and disposal procedures. It was a clear, unambiguous directive. A warning, really. But for all my academic rigor, my disciplined adherence to the sacred texts and the ancient rites, I have always possessed a fatal flaw, a pragmatic, almost engineering-like compulsion to understand the mechanism of things. And that, I see now, was its primary lure. I told myself it was simple maintenance, a cost-effective measure. The thought of summoning the archival custodians, with their glacial pace and their insufferable, knowing glances, filled me with a familiar academic dread. And the process of replacing an entire containment unit, the disruption, the meticulous reconsecration, the sheer bureaucratic nightmare, it simply felt unnecessary. The internal matrix, after all, was merely the secondary seal, protected by this very wax. If I could access it, if I could reinforce it, then the outer seal could be reapplied, and the integrity restored without the bureaucratic fanfare, without the cost, without the exposure. I rationalized, as all men doomed to transgression do, that I was merely being efficient, exercising good judgment where the rigid protocol faltered. I was, in my hubris, attempting to fix a system I believed myself superior to. The outer seal was ancient, its wax hardened by centuries of vigil, inscribed with a particular set of prayers and an obscure Rosicrucian cipher I recognized from the marginalia of the Codex Mysterium I had been reviewing last spring. It was less a physical barrier and more a spiritual membrane, an absorbent layer meant to diffuse ambient resonance, to make the entity dormant. Breaking it was not difficult. A steady hand, a heated blade, carefully tracing the fissures until the entire outer ring could be lifted. There was a faint scent, not of wax, but of something else, something metallic and cold, like old blood mixed with ozone. It was barely perceptible, a ghost of an odor, but it pricked at the back of my throat. I should have stopped then. The manual's warning, the faint metallic tang in the air, the unsettling quiet that descended as the first barrier yielded. These were all signposts on a road I should not have taken. What lay beneath was not more wax, but a disk of obsidian, polished to an impossible sheen, inset with shimmering flecks of what I initially thought was mica, but which on closer inspection resolved into minute, impossibly complex sigils carved with a precision no human hand could achieve. It pulsed faintly, a barely discernible rhythm, like a distant, sluggish heartbeat. This was the true inner seal, the vinculum profundum. It was not inert. It was alive, but in a way that screamed of stagnation, of eons of suppressed, dreaming malevolence. The obsidian itself was warm to the touch, almost feverish, and within its depth, at the very center, the primary containment breach I had sought to mend. Another, smaller crack, an almost invisible sliver across one of the more intricate sigils, a perfect mirroring of the superficial damage to the outer wax. It was as if the entity had chosen its point of egress, had manifested a weakness on the surface to lure me, to give me a reason to delve deeper. I was already committed. My tools were laid out. The specialized resin for the obsidian seal sat ready, its viscous, black surface mirroring the stone itself. The manual, of course, offered no guidance for repairing this seal. No human was meant to see it, let alone touch it. But my scholar's mind, accustomed to dissecting, to understanding, to solving, saw only a fascinating puzzle. I saw a challenge. The hairline fracture was minute, requiring precision. I would apply the resin, allowing it to wick into the breach, healing the scar. A simple procedure, I told myself, a delicate, almost surgical act of restoration. As the tip of my applicator touched the obsidian, as the first drop of resin began to seep into the almost imperceptible crack, the low, resonant hum began. It was not a sound I heard with my ears, not precisely. It was a vibration, a deep, bone-rattling thrum that resonated in my chest, rising up through the floorboards, through the very foundations of the building. The entire room seemed to vibrate, not violently, but with a deep, pervasive energy. And then it happened. Not a flash, not a revelation, but a subtle, insidious shift within my own perception. The floor plan of my head updated itself. It wasn't a map I saw, but a map I felt. A sudden, terrifying omniscience of the surrounding structure. I knew the exact dimensions of every room, the placement of every load-bearing wall, the path of every pipe and conduit. But it wasn't just physical architecture. It was more. I felt the unseen currents of air, the subtle shifts in temperature, the faint, residual psychic emanations from years of archivists, scholars, and unfortunate souls who had worked and died within these walls. I knew the building's hidden veins, its forgotten arteries, its deep, cold heart. I knew the patterns of its energy, its latent power. And I knew with a horrifying certainty that this was not my map. It was its map. It was mapping me. The entity, the thing sealed beneath the obsidian, had not just sensed my intrusion. It had assimilated my awareness of the space. It had used the moment of contact, the moment of vulnerability, to impress its own cognitive blueprint onto mine. Every shadow, every echoing corridor, every sealed-off chamber now held a new, chilling significance. I saw the pathways it could traverse, the lines of resonance it could exploit, the weak points in the very fabric of reality that I had once considered solid and immutable. I was no longer merely in a building. I was within a complex, living organism, and the entity was the consciousness slowly awakening to its full potential, using my mind as its sensor array. Panic, cold and visceral, seized me. I dropped the applicator, the resin spreading like black blood across the obsidian seal. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat, my eyes darting around the room as if expecting to see the walls peel away, revealing the intricate, glowing pathways I now perceived. My hands trembled, clammy with sweat. The hum continued, a low, guttural murmur that was now definitively inside my head, resonating with my own heartbeat. I had not merely opened a seal, I had opened a channel. I had not merely seen a map, I had become a point on its map. All the texts, all the obscure lore I had dismissed as hyperbolic, the whispered stories of entities that didn't just possess, but repattern reality, that understood and co-opted the minds of those who dared to pry, they surged into my memory with the force of irrefutable truth. The Liber Demonum spoke of the trick of knowing, the ability of certain entities to absorb the perception of their jailers, turning their own vigilance into a form of involuntary collaboration. I thought I was fixing a seal, securing the containment. Instead, I had offered it the blueprint of its own prison, and in doing so, offered it the blueprint of my mind. I should have stopped at the first crack. I should have adhered to the manual, to the wisdom of those who had understood the danger. But my pride, my insatiable curiosity, my fatal desire to understand and control led me here. Now, the knowledge I possess is not a shield. It is a brand. Every creak of the ancient timbers, every gust of wind through the leaded windows, every distant whisper from the archives now carries a new, terrifying message. The prison has been redrawn, not by its architect, but by its prisoner, through the unwitting hands of its custodian. And I am merely an extension of its new site. The humming doesn't stop. It's always there, a low, resonant thrum beneath the surface of my thoughts, mapping, always mapping. They say knowledge is power, but power in our world is often just another name for the chain that binds you. This is a story about a specific kind of knowledge, one I acquired through a moment of ill-fated curiosity, a sin far graver than any I have yet committed, or perhaps any I will commit. It's the kind of truth that doesn't set you free. It merely clarifies the boundaries of your cage, shows you the bars, and then locks you inside. Now I walk among the living, knowing the choreography of my own damnation. The confessional in the South Corridor is not like the others. It's a relic, almost an anomaly, even within the labyrinthine anachronisms of this institution. Most of the others are for the faithful, the genuinely penitent seeking solace, or the casual ritual of contrition. But this one, nestled between the archive annex and the restricted scriptorium, has always been different. We call it, in hushed, almost reverent tones, the chamber for technical absolution. No one ever sits inside. Not the priest, not the penitent. It stands as a dark, silent sentinel, its heavy oak door perpetually closed, the brass grate tarnished by centuries of disuse. The official explanation, if one dared to ask, involved ancient rites, specialized cases, a means for absolution of deeds so obscure, so theoretical, that no human voice could properly articulate them, let alone forgive. A convenient fiction, I always assumed, for something far older, far more unsettling. A place of forgotten protocols, perhaps, or merely an architectural quirk. A blind spot in the blueprint of salvation. I had always respected its emptiness. It was a space that radiated an almost palpable nullity, an absence that felt more profound than any presence. But late one night, the kind of night when the air itself feels heavy with secrets, and the moon casts shadows like predatory beasts, a peculiar compulsion seized me. I had been cataloguing a recently discovered collection of apocryphal Hermetic texts, fragile, vellum-bound blasphemies detailing pre-Christian ritual magic and the binding of nameless entities. The dust of ages clung to my fingers, and the strange glyph seemed to pulse faintly under the lamplight, whispering a forgotten language. My mind, already frayed by the esoteric syntax and the disturbing implications of what I was reading, felt a distinct pull toward the corridor. A cold draught, I told myself, a trick of the old building's breath. But it was more than that. It was an invitation, insidious and irresistible. I found myself standing before the confessional, my hand hovering over the cold, ornate brass grate separating the two compartments. The silence that usually emanated from it was now replaced by something. Not a sound, not precisely, but a subtle vibration, a hum that seemed to resonate within the very bones of the building, and more disturbingly, within my own skull. A faint, almost imperceptible scent hung in the air, a mix of old parchment, ozone, and something else. Something metallic, like freshly spilled blood, or perhaps just the raw tang of unspeakable dread. My heart, usually so steady, began a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Turn back, Codex, a voice, not my own, whispered in the back of my mind. This is not for you. But the scholar's curse, the insatiable hunger for forbidden knowledge, held me fast. I pressed my ear to the grate, my breath catching in my throat. For a long moment there was nothing but the frantic drumming of my own blood. Then a voice, soft, almost a murmur, yet shockingly distinct, and profoundly, devastatingly familiar. It was my voice. Not an echo, not a mimicry, but my cadence, my particular lilt, the subtle intonations that only I would recognize. My blood ran cold. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. The voice on the other side continued, ignoring me, speaking as if to an unseen confessor. It wasn't a question nor a plea. It was a recitation. I confess to having divulged the sacred names of the unbound on the 3rd day of the 10th month, 2 years hence, causing the dissolution of the wards in Sector Gamma 7 and the subsequent incursion. This act was committed out of intellectual hubris, a thirst for truth, as I had rationalized it. Say you agree. My mind reeled. Unbound. Sector Gamma 7. I had no knowledge of such things. And the date, 2 years hence. The voice was speaking in the perfect tense, as if these actions had already transpired, were already a matter of historical record. But they were things I had not yet done. My blood ran colder still. This wasn't a confession of past sins. This was a premonition, a dark prophecy. I should have torn myself away then. I should have fled, burned the texts, perhaps even myself, to erase the knowledge. But the sheer horrifying audacity of it held me captive. My own voice, detailing my own future transgressions with a casual, almost indifferent tone. It felt like a violation of my very existence, an invasion of my unwritten future. And that unnerving coda, say you agree. The voice continued, an unholy litany of crimes yet to be committed. I confess to having tampered with the chronal gyre's primary indexing array, thereby severing the temporal link to the original chronologies, on the 4th day of the 5th month, 3 years hence. My motivation was to observe the unfolding chaos, to understand the natural entropy of time without the imposed order. Say you agree. Each sentence was a meticulous annotation, a timestamp like a canonical law, a perfectly articulated description of an act so complex, so utterly beyond my current capabilities or even understanding, that it could only be the work of a mind far greater or far more malevolent than my own. Vatican conspiracies, forbidden knowledge, the dark underbelly of the sacred texts I'd spent my life studying. They all swirled into a terrifying, coherent narrative. This was not merely absolution. This was a preemptive ledger, a pre-written condemnation. I confess to having opened the seventh seal of the Librum Obscura, releasing the nascent thought forms into the collective consciousness on the 1st day of the 7th month, 5 years hence. My justification was the pursuit of complete, unfiltered epistemological access, despite the projected psychological cost to humanity. Say you agree. Librum Obscura. I knew that name. A mythical tome, whispered only in the deepest, most restricted archives, rumored to contain the unfiltered thoughts of pre-creation entities, a text so dangerous its mere contemplation could induce madness. To open its seventh seal, the very idea was anathema. Yet my own voice recounted it as if it were a casual anecdote, a scholarly pursuit gone slightly awry. My heart was a frozen knot in my chest. Who was doing this? Was it some elaborate psychological experiment? A cruel jest by a hidden sect within the institution, aware of my burgeoning curiosity regarding forbidden law? Or something far, far worse? The thought that my life was a script, my choices preordained, was a terror so profound it threatened to shatter my carefully constructed reality. Then the voice on the other side of the grate paused. A breath, a sigh, so intimately mine that I felt it reverberate through my own lungs. And then a single, devastating phrase. I confess, little Albie, to having irrevocably severed the anchor of sanctity from the prime nexus, thereby allowing the old ones to seep into the periphery of consensual reality, on the cusp of the 9th night of the 12th month, 8 years hence. This was a deliberate act of perceived necessary deconstruction to prove the fragility of all assumed order. Say you agree. Little Albie, my childhood nickname, a name only my grandmother, long since departed, had ever used, a secret held close, buried deep within the most protected chambers of my memory. No one here knew it, not a soul. It was a singularity, a unique identifier, a key that unlocked the absolute, terrifying truth of the situation. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't a mimicry. This was me, my future, revealed. Not by an oracle, but by some unseen, preemptively absolved version of myself, in a confessional designed for the sins of the unborn. A cold, visceral panic seized me. My hands clawed at the grate, my knuckles white. The metallic scent intensified, mingling with the acrid stench of my own fear. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. My throat was constricted, as if a spectral hand had clamped around it. The implications were suffocating. If my sins were pre-written, if my absolution was already on file, then who was writing my story? Who was the true author? And was my existence nothing more than a puppet show for some cosmic, indifferent audience? Was free will merely an illusion, meticulously maintained until the final act? The hum in the air became a low thrum, vibrating through the floorboards, through the very fabric of the old monastery. The shadows deepened, seemed to writhe and stretch, turning the familiar corridor into an alien landscape. I felt observed, not just by an unseen confessor, but by something ancient and pervasive, an entity that had laid out my path from beginning to end, meticulously detailing every transgression, every act of forbidden knowledge I would pursue. The forbidden books I had been reading, the names that summoned, the shadowy rituals, they weren't just academic curiosities anymore. They were the very tools, the very triggers that would lead me down the path already paved, already confessed. My mind raced, tumbling through the abyss of this dreadful revelation. Was this technical absolution a mechanism of control, a way to mitigate future damage, or merely a record-keeping system for an entity beyond human comprehension? A dark accounting, a cosmic pre-audit of souls. And the say you agree, was it an empty ritual, or did it subtly bind the future self to these preordained crimes? Was I, simply by listening, already agreeing? Had my curiosity signed my doom? The notion that the Vatican, or the powers behind it, possessed such a device, such knowledge, such control over the temporal stream, was horrifying in its scope. It reduced humanity to mere ciphers, pawns in a game whose rules and players were utterly unknown. I finally tore myself away from the grate, stumbling backward, my legs barely holding my weight. The silence in the corridor rushed back in, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the echoes of my future voice, the phantom sensation of my grandmother's touch, and the terrifying weight of deeds yet to be done. I had heard my future, and it was a horrifying tapestry of intellectual transgression and catastrophic consequence. The pursuit of truth had led me not to enlightenment, but to the cold, hard knowledge of my own inescapable damnation. I still hear the cadence of my own voice in the deepest parts of the night, reciting my future sins, each ending with that chilling, inescapable phrase, "Say you agree." The flickering fluorescents hum a lullaby of deceit, a constant, buzzing reminder that I am here, perpetually enclosed, forever monitoring the uncontainable. Tonight, however, Rule 4, the inviolable edict against physical contact with active containment assets, feels less like a safeguard and more like a cruel taunt. The saint's bone, a relic of forgotten suffering, pulsed with an almost magnetic pull, a challenge I was too weak, too curious, too utterly human to refuse. Now, the chill that seeped from its ancient marrow has taken root within me, a parasitic echo of a long-dead past. My reflection no longer shows my eyes, only the abyss where they once were, and I can hear whispers from a tongue that died with empires, all because I dared to touch what was never meant to be touched. It was late, as it always is when the real work begins, or perhaps when the real unraveling commences. The containment chamber, sterile and silent save for the low thrum of the filtration systems, usually offers a deceptive sense of security. Tonight, that illusion had fractured. The air itself felt thick, not with dust, but with an unspoken weight, a pressure that bore down on the very fabric of my thoughts. I was alone, of course. My colleagues, bless their ignorance, believed me to be poring over the usual reams of data, cross-referencing ancient texts with modern spectroscopic analyses. They didn't know about the other texts, the ones whispered about in hushed tones in the deepest archives of the Vatican, the ones that hint at the true nature of what we attempt to contain here. They certainly didn't know about my particular fixation, the reliquary of Saint Dismas, or what was believed to be a fragment of him. This reliquary, a Gothic monstrosity of tarnished silver and smoky glass, had always held a peculiar fascination for me. It was not the oldest, nor the most volatile of our assets, but there was an inherent blasphemy in its veneration, a grotesque irony in its presence amongst the truly unspeakable. Dismas, the penitent thief, revered for a moment of grace on the cross, reduced to a single, calcified phalange. And yet, tonight, as I approached it for my routine visual inspection, something was amiss. The small, yellowed finger bone, usually secured tightly within its glass tube by a delicate web of ancient silver wire, had shifted. It jutted out, just slightly enough to catch the light at an odd angle, enough to create a shadow that, to my increasingly frayed nerves, looked exactly like it was pointing directly at me. Rule 4 echoed in my mind, absolute non-contact during active containment cycles. It was the first rule, the cardinal sin of our profession. We are observers, documentarians, not participants. But the bone, ancient and brittle, seemed to beckon to challenge the very premise of my detachment. It looked fragile, precarious, as if a tremor might dislodge it completely. A simple act, I told myself, a resecuring, a maintenance task. I could justify it later in my private notes. Anomaly observed, restabilized. Such were the lies we told ourselves to bridge the chasm between duty and dread. But the truth, the insidious, whispering truth, was that I wanted to touch it. I wanted to feel the texture of antiquity, to bridge the impossible gulf between this sterile present and the echoing past it represented. I wanted to see if the stories were true. My gloved hand, ostensibly for sterile handling, but in truth, a flimsy psychological barrier, reached out. The silver filigree was cool beneath the synthetic fabric, but nothing prepared me for the sensation that followed as my fingertip brushed against the exposed bone. It wasn't merely cold, it was colder than cold. A temperature that defied physics, that seemed to drain heat not just from my flesh, but from the very air around it, from the very core of my being. It was the chill of the grave, of interstellar voids, of something that had never known warmth or life or God. As I gently pressed the bone back into its rightful place, nudging it until it sat snugly within the wire, I felt a distinct, undeniable pressure pushing back. Not resistive, but reciprocal. A living, or perhaps unliving press. A spectral echo of touch. I pulled my hand away sharply, a jolt of alarm electrifying my arm. My breath caught in my throat, a dry, rasping sound in the sudden, profound silence. That's when I saw it. In the highly polished silver lid of the reliquary, a surface usually so reflective it rendered my features with pristine clarity, my reflection wavered. My face was there, pale and drawn, but where my eyes should have been, there were only two smooth, unblinking hollows, like sculpted marble or a death mask. An immediate, visceral terror seized me, colder even than the bone. It was not a trick of the light. It was a stark, horrifying truth. My gaze darted from the reflection to my own eyes, now wide and dilated, then back to the silver, where the grotesque absence stared back, unchanging. And then the bone twitched. Not a vibration from my hand, not an afterimage, but a distinct, minute, independent movement. A final, deliberate shudder as if settling into its new purpose. And in that instant, a deluge. A torrent of sensation, not visual, not auditory, but an entire sensory landscape erupted in my mind. Not memories of the saint, but memories from him. A searing pain in the joints, a blinding light, the taste of dust and blood, the roar of a distant crowd, the smell of sweat and fear. But it was not human. It was ancient, primordial, overlaid with an alien consciousness that spoke of suffering far beyond any mortal man. It was a memory of stone, of earth, of centuries passing, of names forgotten and invoked. A flash of a great, obsidian altar under a sky that bled twilight, of robed figures whispering, Anima damnata, of a silent, watching horror that had seen the crucifixion not as an act of salvation, but as an opportunity. This was what they kept hidden in the deepest vaults, what the Vatican archives only hinted at in suppressed texts, in codices bound in human skin, their pages scrawled with an ink that seemed to writhe. I had delved into those forbidden books, risking the sanity of my soul, seeking the truth behind the anodyne explanations. I had read about the parasites of spirit, the chorus of the forgotten, entities that cling to sanctity like barnacles to a ship, twisting it into something altogether monstrous. And now one of them, a shard of pure, malevolent recollection, was inside me. Whose memory had entered me through that sacred shard? Was it Dismas, the thief who died repentant? Or was it something far older, a thing that had merely attached itself to the bone, feeding on the reverence, waiting for a breach? My mind reeled, trying to reconcile the clinical reality of the containment facility with the profound, ancient terror that had just become an integral part of my consciousness. The containment was breached, not physically, but psychically. I was the new vessel, the living reliquary. I could feel the presence now, a cold knot in my chest, a faint, resonant hum behind my eyes. It wasn't just a memory, it was a knowing. A knowing of things I was never meant to comprehend, of rituals performed under blasphemous moons, of names that, when uttered, peeled back the fragile veil of reality. I remembered a passage from the Liber Tenebrarum: he who touches the sacred corruption shall become its mirror, reflecting the gaze of the abyss. My reflection, eyeless, flashed in my mind. The air in the chamber now felt charged, heavy with a silent, expectant tension. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every hum of machinery took on a sinister resonance. My own heartbeat thundered in my ears, an erratic drum against the encroaching silence of the other. I pressed my palms against my temples, as if I could physically contain the burgeoning horror within my skull. The knowledge was there, sharp and vivid, a burning coal of ancient malevolence, yet still frustratingly fragmented, like listening to a forgotten language through static. I could almost hear the whispered incantations, see the glimmer of forbidden symbols, feel the presence of the things that answer when those names are summoned. I should have stopped, of course. I should have stopped when I first felt the peculiar draw, when the bone seemed to shift and point. I should have turned my back on the reliquary, reported the anomaly, and let the designated team handle it, following protocol. But I kept reaching, kept probing, kept seeking. My academic curiosity, my relentless pursuit of the truth, had finally driven me over the precipice, plunging me into an abyss I now carried within me. The lines between what I was observing and what I had become blurred, then dissolved entirely. The containment protocols, the rules, the very foundation of my work were a joke. There was no containing this. Not now. The cold within me intensifies, a steady, creeping tendril that coils around my heart, around my very essence. I'm no longer merely a researcher. I am a conduit, a gate, and the gate is open. I can feel the memory shifting, settling, burrowing deeper. It whispers now, a faint, sibilant sound that is not in my ears but directly in my mind. It is learning me just as I have learned it. And the things it remembers, the things it knows, they are not content to remain in the past. Now my own eyes feel like hollows, eternally staring, eternally seeing what I can never unsee. The old rhythms were meant to protect me, to keep the encroaching darkness at bay. I relied on them, the steady ticking of a clock I could not see, the distant, muffled peal of bells marking the hours above ground, a fragile tether to the world of the living. But down here under Rome, where the very stones hum with forgotten names and unspeakable histories, even time itself becomes a pliable, treacherous thing. I thought I knew the cadence, the sacred count. I was wrong. And my miscalculation, or perhaps the universe's deliberate betrayal, has now opened a door that can never be shut. The air in the deepest levels of the Vatican's secret archives is perpetually heavy, thick with the scent of aged parchment, dust motes dancing in the meager light of my lamp, and something else, a cold, metallic tang that hints at the minerals saturating the earth above, or perhaps the residue of ancient iron wrought into shackles. It's a silence that isn't truly silent, a pressurized hush that presses on the eardrums, filled with the whispers of countless forgotten texts, the murmur of the river Styx, translated into subterranean drafts. My routine, carefully constructed to maintain a semblance of sanity, dictates that I mark the passage of hours by the faint, resonant echo of the city's bells. 12 bells for the night, a comfort, a reminder that humanity still breathes and sleeps above this labyrinth of secrets. On the ninth bell, I always pause. It is tradition, a small personal ritual that has served as my anchor. The ninth hour, nonne, when Christ is said to have yielded his spirit. A moment of reflection, a brief mental recitation from the Psalms, usually Psalm 91. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I tell myself it wards off the creeping dread, the sense of being an intruder in a space not meant for human eyes, a profane archaeologist of damnation. My fingers trace the spines of the forbidden codices, the Liber Ignotus, the Compendium Maleficarum, texts whose very existence is a heresy against reason. I tell myself I am merely observing, translating, recording. But down here, observation is participation, and every translated word is a brick laid in a pathway to something unholy. This night the ninth bell chimed, precisely as it always does, a deep, sonorous reverberation that vibrates through the very rock beneath my feet. I closed my eyes, picturing the vast, silent dome of St. Peter's above the sleeping city. I began my mental recitation, the familiar words a balm against the icy grip of the archive's secrets. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night. I focused on the rhythm of the words, the comforting repetition. But then, a flicker. not of my lamp, which remained steadfast, but of the sound itself. The echo of the ninth bell seemed to hang, suspended, for just a fraction too long, then abruptly ceased, swallowed by the oppressive silence. It wasn't a natural decay of sound. It was an amputation. My eyes snapped open. The chill in the air intensified, pulling at the frayed edges of my concentration. Had I miscounted? Was my mind, after months of isolation and exposure to these texts, finally beginning to fray? I replayed the sequence in my head, the distinct 9 tolls, the pause. Yes, it was 9. But then, a subtle shift in the air pressure, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor from deep within the earth itself. It was as if the city above had taken a sudden, sharp breath and held it. Then the 10th bell. But it wasn't a single, distinct chime. It was a stroke, a strike that landed with an impossible weight, and then simply didn't stop. It wasn't a sustained note, but a rapid, rhythmic series of impacts, a continuous hammering thrum that resonated not from above, but from below. A triplet beat, a monstrous pulse that echoed the first strike, then the second, then the third, each one indistinguishable from the last, folding in on itself, an infinite peal that compressed time into a single, terrifying vibration. My lamp flickered wildly now, unable to withstand the assault of this unnatural resonance. Shadows stretched and danced, contorting the ancient shelves into grotesque, grasping claws. The dust motes, once dancing, now vibrated so violently they formed shimmering clouds, like disturbed spirits. I instinctively pressed my hands against my ears, but it was futile. The sound wasn't just in the air. It was in the stone, in the earth, in the very bones of the world. It burrowed deep, bypassing my outer defenses, going straight for the core of me. And then I felt it, a sympathetic vibration, originating not from the archive's floor, but from within my own chest. My ribcage began to hum, a low, visceral throb that perfectly matched the infernal triplet rhythm. Thrum, thrum, thrum. My heartbeat, usually a frantic tattoo of fear in this place, now slowed, aligning itself with the monstrous cadence. My blood, my very life force, began to pump in time with the unending bell. It wasn't just an external sound anymore. It was an internal invasion, a complete synchronization. I was being tuned. I could see the faint tremor in my hands as I tried to steady them against a stack of bound folios. Codex Gigas. It mocked me, its dark, leathery cover seeming to pulse with the same rhythm. I remembered the legends, the forbidden knowledge that spoke of sympathetic resonance, of the world beneath mirroring the world above, of how certain frequencies could unmake reality, could tear the veil. Had my incessant delving into these grim tomes, these records of ritual and invocation, somehow opened a channel? Had I unwittingly provided the resonance? Through the overwhelming sound, I became acutely aware of what was happening outside, above me. The entire city of Rome must be stuttering, caught in this impossible, unceasing 10th bell. I imagined the pigeons, those ubiquitous, flapping denizens of the eternal city, caught mid-flight, their wings beating the air in frantic, unmoving blurs, suspended like held breaths against a sky gone momentarily mute. The world had paused, held hostage by a single, unending note of pure dread. Down here, the demon's cage, that ancient, fabled containment unit I had only ever read about in the Disquisition's Magicae, a theoretical construct I'd always believed. It wasn't theoretical anymore. I could feel its unseen presence, somewhere deeper beneath this very chamber, thrumming with an energy that was not just powerful, but hungry. It was a dark heart, finally stirring, its pulse now my own. The texts I'd been studying, the names I'd whispered aloud in the sterile quiet of the night, the rituals of binding and unbinding, they weren't just dusty words on a page. They were blueprints, and I had been reading them avidly, almost ritually, for months. I should have stopped when I first found the marginalia in the Pactum Infernis, the subtle annotations in an archaic script that spoke not of angels, but of the unchained chord. I should have closed the book, turned my back, walked away when my fingers brushed against the dried, flacking pages of the Liber Niger, knowing the tales of its power, the warnings inscribed in blood. I should have stopped when my own heartbeat, after nights of deciphering the hidden language of the Grigori, began to occasionally skip, mimicking a strange triple beat I couldn't explain. But I kept reading. I always kept reading. The pursuit of knowledge, the insatiable hunger to understand the mechanisms of the universe, even the dark ones, it became an addiction, a pathology. And now I am paying the price. The thrumming intensified, reaching a crescendo that threatened to shatter my very bones. It was a song, no, a liturgy, but one not sung by human voices, nor by divine choirs. It was a hymn of chains breaking, of a barrier dissolving, of a patience finally expiring. The demon's cage was singing, and its melody was a triplet, the exact same meter now pulsing through my own arteries, my own skull. Who tuned me to hell's liturgy? Was it the whispered names from the forbidden texts, the precise incantations I'd meticulously translated? Or was it something far more insidious, a subtle corruption of my own will, a hidden chord within my soul that resonated with the darkness all along? I am no longer a detached observer. My heart beats the same rhythm as the breaking cage. My blood sings the same song as the awakening terror. I am a bell, and the city has answered in kind, but I am the one now ringing. This wasn't supposed to happen, not like this. I came to the archive seeking answers, seeking truth, but all I found was a reflection of my own undoing, a chilling premonition pennied by my own hand. The ledger, ancient and ominous, whispered secrets I was never meant to hear, secrets that have now etched themselves into the very fabric of my being. I am trapped, not by chains, but by a knowledge that has already claimed me. The air in the archive is thick with the dust of centuries, a fine grey powder that settles on everything, and I sometimes think permeates the very lungs, carrying whispers of forgotten rituals and unholy pacts. It's a comforting smell, usually, for a scholar like me, the scent of paper decay, of leather, of knowledge meticulously preserved and sometimes mercifully forgotten. But tonight, it tastes like ash and regret. I sit at my usual mahogany desk, the one carved with the faint, almost erased symbol of a coiled serpent, the single flickering gas lamp casting long, dancing shadows that make the rows of towering shelves seem to breathe. My fingers, accustomed to the brittle caress of ancient parchment, tremble slightly as I reach for the black ledger. It's a peculiar artifact, even by the archive standards. Bound in ebony leather, its pages are thick, almost like vellum, and edged with a subtle silver leaf that has tarnished with age to a dull gleam. For generations, it has been the repository of what the Vatican librarians euphemistically call emergency measures. A euphemism, I now know, for the truly unspeakable. Most of its entries are in a cramped, archaic script, the kind that requires careful deciphering and a good deal of paleographical expertise. Records of forgotten plagues, of heresies so profound they threaten to unravel the very fabric of reality, of interventions. I've spent countless nights poring over its brittle pages, translating the terse Latin and the even more obscure ciphers, always maintaining a detached, academic curiosity. I've catalogued its accounts of soul transfers attempted by desperate alchemists, of forbidden incantations used to bind ethereal entities, of names that, when uttered correctly, could reshape creation. I thought I understood its dark grammar. I was wrong. Tonight, something pulls me to a section I've never noticed before. Perhaps it was always there, shrouded by a convenient obscurity, waiting for the precise moment of my absolute vulnerability. The usual script gives way to something else, something terrifyingly familiar. My breath catches in my throat. It is my handwriting. No doubt, no possibility of error. The looping R's, the hasty crosses on the T's, the way I always curl the tail of a Y just so. It's my hand, unmistakable, glaring back at me from the shadowed page. A cold dread begins to trickle down my spine, a sensation far more potent than the usual chill of the archive. This isn't just a resemblance, it's a mirror image of my own unconscious scribblings. I trace the lines with a hesitant finger, the parchment feeling strangely cool, almost damp. The dates, that's when the trickle of dread became a flood. The entries are dated not last week, not last year, but tomorrow, all of them, in my handwriting. My mind, usually a fortress of logic and meticulously catalogued facts, begins to buckle. How can I have written something that has not yet occurred? Is this a cruel jest, a temporal anomaly, or something far, far worse? My scholarly composure, honed over decades of confronting the bizarre and the profane, shatters into 1,000 pieces. This isn't an obscure theological text. This is a personal violation of time and identity. I force myself to read, my eyes devouring the words as if they hold the key to my very existence or its imminent erasure. The list is short, horrifyingly precise. Permit breath exchange. Permit name exchange. Permit place exchange. Each one is written with the clarity and precision of a bureaucratic edict, yet the implications are anything but. Breath exchange. Does that mean the very air I breathe, the life force that sustains me, can be traded, swapped, surrendered? The notion conjures images of suffocating emptiness, of being hollowed out, leaving behind only an inert shell. My chest tightens, and I suddenly find it difficult to draw a full breath, as if the first item on the list is already beginning its insidious work. Then permit name exchange. This is where the true terror takes root, deep in the fertile soil of my identity. A name, for a scholar of the arcane, is more than a label. It's a key, a binding, a reflection of one's essence. To exchange a name is to surrender oneself, to become someone else, or perhaps no one at all. Is this what the forbidden texts hinted at, the rituals of transformation that steal not just the face but the soul? I've seen references to such things in obscure Gnostic codices, in the apocryphal Gospels that speak of a changeable self, a fluid identity. I always dismissed them as poetic allegory. Now they scream with the terrible veracity of an eyewitness account. The idea that my name, my very designation, could be bartered away, given up without my conscious consent, makes my skin crawl. What would remain? A nameless presence, a ghost inhabiting a borrowed form. And finally, permit place exchange. This is a physical terror, an unmooring from reality. Not just a change of location, but an exchange. Whose place? Mine for theirs, theirs for mine. It speaks of displacement, of being uprooted and replanted where I do not belong, perhaps where I cannot belong. The archive, usually my sanctuary, suddenly feels like a cage, its walls closing in, its shadows stretching into predatory forms. I think of the ancient stories of souls ripped from their bodies and thrust into different planes, of travelers who step through a forgotten doorway and find themselves in a land not merely foreign, but fundamentally wrong. My eyes drop to the bottom of the section, to the signature. There it is, stark and undeniable, my own name, signed with the familiar flourish beneath a short, chillingly formal phrase. Concedo hic privilegia. I grant these privileges. I should have stopped. I should have slammed the ledger shut the moment I recognized my own hand. My training, my entire academic discipline, is built on the premise of rational inquiry, of objective distance. But how can one maintain objectivity when the subject of inquiry is oneself, caught in a temporal trap of one's own unwitting making? I kept reading, compelled by a morbid curiosity that felt less like free will and more like a puppet string. And now the words are seared into my mind, a brand of ownership. Who grants permissions I never intended to ask for? The question echoes in the cavernous silence of the archive, reverberating against the tall shelves lined with the secrets of the dead. It's not just who, but when and how. Was this a moment of madness I cannot recall, a fragment of a dream given terrible substance? Or is the archive itself alive, a malignant entity that manipulates time and identity, inscribing its will onto the unsuspecting souls who seek its knowledge? The thought is blasphemous, but no less terrifying. The ledger does not just record history, it writes it, and apparently it has written my future, signed by my past self, for a tomorrow I dread with every fiber of my being. The very paper feels cold beneath my fingertips, like a tombstone. And now, with the truth of the ledger laid bare, I realize the full, horrifying extent of my predicament. I am not simply reading about a conspiracy, I am part of one. The words on the page aren't a warning, they are a done deal. They tell you in hushed, reverent tones that some things are best left unsaid, unwritten, unthought. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the unsaid calls to you, a forbidden siren song echoing through the deepest chambers of forgotten archives. I heard it. I felt it. And like a fool, I answered, believing myself a scholar, not a pawn. Now the silence whispers my name, and the very air around me feels like a lung slowly drawing breath before it exhales a truth I cannot bear. The knowledge I sought was never meant for human ears, and now it has found mine. The chill in the vestry always bites deeper than any external frost. It's a dry, ancient cold, sifting through centuries of consecrated linen and the faint, sweet decay of old wood and older paper. This particular room, deep within the Vatican's most restricted annex, the section known only as nomina nescientia, where things are catalogued by what they are not rather than what they are, held an oppressive quiet that pressed down like a physical weight. I remember the dust motes, dancing in the solitary beam of light piercing through a grimy, high-set window, illuminating the rows of brass nameplates affixed to dark, unyielding chests and sarcophagi. Each plate was blank, or so it seemed at first glance, until you knew to look for the faint, almost imperceptible etching, a glyph, a symbol, a fragment of an extinct language. My instructor, the late Father Alaric Thorne, had always warned against such places. He spoke of the sacra precepta, the sacred prohibitions, that governed the containment of entities the Church could not destroy, only acknowledge. He had hinted, in his increasingly fragmented lectures before the fever took him, about the ultimate prohibition, to utter the verum nomen, the true name, or title, as it was colloquially known, of any contained entity. He called it an act of dignification, bestowing upon the nameless form the power of human recognition, a crown forged of our own limited perception. His last coherent words to me, a raspy whisper from his deathbed, were a sequence of syllables, not a language I recognized, delivered with the desperate urgency of a man trying to unburden his soul before the final descent. I dismissed it then, a dying man's delirium, a bad dream made manifest. But the syllables had lodged themselves, insidious and persistent, in the hidden recesses of my mind. Now, standing before the blankest, largest brass plate in the nomina nescientia, its surface polished to an unnerving sheen by generations of unseen hands, those syllables resurfaced. I had spent weeks here, poring over cross-referenced manuscripts, deciphering oblique references in apocryphal gospels, and piecing together fractured liturgical fragments from the early Christian Gnostics. I was not trying to summon anything. I was simply attempting to understand what Father Thorne had inadvertently bequeathed me. I had traced the symbol on this particular plate, a helix within a fractured circle, to a series of ancient prohibitions concerning the imago sign for me, the image without form, an entity described in obscure Mandean texts as the voice that creates silence. And through a maddeningly complex cipher Thorne himself had invented and then, tragically, forgotten to fully explain, I believed I had finally deciphered his deathbed utterance. The title. A tremor ran through me. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was the thrill of intellectual conquest, the adrenaline rush of a scholar on the precipice of a monumental discovery. My rational mind wrestled with the ingrained dread. It's just a name, I told myself, a series of sounds, a relic of ancient superstition. But the cold, dry air of the vestry seemed to thin, making each breath a conscious effort. I closed my eyes, those syllables burning behind my eyelids like after-images of a blinding light. Thorne's voice, clear as if he were standing beside me, echoed, "Never dignify it." But I was a fool, intoxicated by the pursuit of knowledge. I opened my eyes, fixed them on the gleaming brass, and exhaled the syllables. They felt heavy on my tongue, alien and primal. THRSHKER. It wasn't loud, barely a whisper, a sound meant only for my own ears, a dare spoken to the silent, unfeeling air. The change wasn't immediate, not a sudden flash or cacophony. It was subtle, insidious, like the gradual onset of a fever. The brass plate before me, which moments ago had reflected my own pale, strained face, began to fog. Not from my breath, for I was standing a foot away and the air was still. It was an internal mist, blooming from within the metal itself, spreading like a blush across the polished surface. Then, just as slowly, it began to clear, and as it cleared, I saw it. The same phenomenon was occurring across the entire room. Every single brass plate, those affixed to the chests, the sarcophagi, even the small, unobtrusive ones marking the shelves of scrolls. All of them were fogging and clearing in a staggered, rhythmic cadence. My breath hitched. It was like watching a vast, silent mechanism come to life. The plates weren't just fogging, they were breathing. A slow, collective inhalation, a pause, then an equally slow, deliberate exhalation. The metallic surfaces shimmered with internal condensation, then became pristine once more, only to begin the cycle anew. It was too uniform, too organic, too unnatural to be a trick of the light or a sudden change in humidity. Lungs. Metallic lungs. Hidden beneath every one of those blank, silent surfaces. I should have stopped then. I should have turned and fled, locked the vestry, buried the key. But I stood transfixed, a moth drawn to an impossible flame. Then came the sound from above. Faint at first, a scuff, a drag, the unmistakable sound of a heavy boot on an unseen flagstone floor. The scriptorium superior, the archive directly above the vestry, was always empty after sundown. No one was ever permitted there, save for the occasional, authorized cardinal on an infrequent, solitary pilgrimage. Yet the sounds continued. Not just a scuff now, but a deliberate, rhythmic progression. Step, drag, step, drag. It grew louder, moving from one end of the scriptorium to the other, then back again. A slow, heavy, relentless march. A procession with no feet. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the breathing brass. Focus, codex, I told myself, clutching the forgotten manuscript in my trembling hand. Rationalize this. It's an echo, a draft, the building settling. But the sounds were too distinct, too purposeful. They were coming from directly above me, directly over the title I had just uttered. And then a new phenomenon. As the brass plates exhaled this time, the mist on their surfaces didn't just clear. It receded, coalescing into faint, shimmering script, not the obscure glyphs, not the fractured circles, something utterly, chillingly familiar. My eyes darted from plate to plate, my mind recoiling in horror. On one, then another, then every single plate in the room, words formed. Letters, luminous and vaporous, materializing from the metallic breath. My full name. My baptismal name, Thomas Alaric Gabriel, and beneath it on some plates a string of numbers, my birth date, my enrollment number in the seminary, my security clearance code, the details of my very existence whispered back to me by inanimate metal drawn from where. The procession above ceased. The breathing of the brass plates slowed, then stopped. All the plates were now clear, reflecting my horrified face, the letters of my name still glowing faintly on each surface before they too faded, leaving only the polished, mocking gleam. I had given it a crown, I had dignified it, and in return it had taken mine. It had taken my name, breathed it, possessed it. It had acknowledged me, and in that acknowledgement it had claimed me. I wasn't just a scholar anymore. I was a known entity, a recipient, a vessel. And the chilling thought that burrowed deep into my core was this: what precisely had I invited into the sanctity of this vestry, into the fabric of my own being, when I gave a voice to the voiceless? I have not been alone since. The whispers have become a steady hum, a low thrumming against my teeth, as if the very air inside this place is now vibrating with an unspeakable name. I've tried to remember the faces of those who sent me, the crisp, unblemished men in their pressed cassocks, but their features blur and twist into something monstrous, something that grins with too many teeth. My hands, once steady instruments of scholarship, now tremble with a relentless palsy, mirroring the shuddering of the walls around me. This isn't a place of escape. It's a living mausoleum, and I am its newest, most terrified resident. The protocol was clear, etched into my memory by rote repetition. Ascend in silence, eyes down. Do not deviate. Do not look back. Above all, do not acknowledge the things that watch from the periphery. They called it an evacuation, a standard retrieval from a compromised site, but the lie tastes like ash in my mouth now. There is no ascent. There is only this looping descent, each turn of the corridor a further betrayal, each exit sign a cruel jest. My lamplight, a feeble ember against the crushing dark, casts my elongated shadow ahead, only for it to fall, time and again, across the very threshold I've been trying to flee. The door. Always the door. It stands there, immutable, as if time itself bends to its will. The ancient, iron-bound wood, warped with the weight of centuries and untold horrors, is unmistakable. The arcane seals, which I myself documented as shattered mere days ago, are inexplicably reformed. They glow faintly now, with a pulsating, internal light that seems to mock my frantic efforts. Each one, a complex sigil of binding and warding, looks freshly drawn, as though someone or something has painstakingly re-inscribed them while I have been stumbling through this labyrinthine deception. My breath hitches, a shallow, desperate gasp in the cold, still air. The lamplight, my only companion, seems to cough, its flame sputtering precariously, casting my frantic eyes across the familiar, terrible details. It's a deliberate torment, this return, a calculated cruelty designed to break whatever fragile sanity I still cling to. I should have stopped the first night, the night I felt the chain's answer. I remember it with a clarity that stings, a vivid regret burned into the fabric of my consciousness. It was in the Vatican's secret archives, deep within sublevel Gamma, where the most heavily redacted and utterly forbidden texts were kept. I was searching for corroborating evidence on the Codex Maleficarum Aeternum, a vile tome whose very existence the Holy See publicly denied. I found it, of course. Tucked away behind a false wall, in a lead-lined box that radiated a palpable sense of dread, it lay waiting. The initial tremor, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration, ran through the ancient iron chains that bound the book. A low hum, a resonant frequency that spoke of immense power held barely in check. My hand, even then, should have recoiled. My mind, even then, should have understood. But I, in my arrogant pursuit of knowledge, in my scholar's hunger for the forbidden truth, dismissed it as a structural anomaly, perhaps the building settling. Oh, the folly of hubris. But I kept reading. I devoured its pages, a blasphemous feast of names and incantations, of dark sacraments and binding rituals. The Codex spoke of entities from outside the known cosmos, beings of pure void and unmaking, locked away by the earliest, most desperate acts of human faith. It detailed the method of their containment, the sacred architecture of prisons built not just of stone and iron, but of belief and esoteric frequencies. It spoke of a place beneath the Vatican, an inverse cathedral, a black heart that pulsed with forbidden knowledge. And it spoke of the door, Janua Noctis, the door of night. The rules now read themselves on the walls, not the benign, sterile directives of the evacuation protocol, but new strictures, scrawled in a viscous, dark substance that could only be blood. It glistens, wet and fresh, in the lamplight. The scent, metallic and cloying, fills my nostrils. Non transibis, one declares, etched in bold, archaic Latin, meaning, you shall not pass. But it's not a warning to me anymore. It's a statement of fact, a confirmation of my predicament. Another reads, clavis et custos sum, I am the key and the guardian. And then, the final, most damning inscription, winding itself around the others, dripping heavily, as if written by a dying hand. Nomen tuum est ultima clausula. Your name is the last clause. My name. It is there, intertwined with the ancient seals on the door, etched into the new blood paint on the walls, whispered on the wind that isn't truly wind, but the rustling of something vast and unseen. I see it, I hear it, I feel it, a chilling resonance in my very bones. The first night when the chains answered, it was merely an echo of something ancient stirring. Now it is a response to me. I spoke the names from the Codex, not aloud, but in my mind, tracing the forbidden glyphs with my academic curiosity, convinced I was merely observing, dissecting. But the Codex isn't a passive text. It is a living trap, a mechanism designed to ensnare the unwary. By learning the names, by understanding the rituals, I didn't just gain knowledge, I became part of them. The Vatican knew this. The men in cassocks who sent me down here, they weren't evacuating me. They were getting me to my post. This entire facility, this endless labyrinth leading always back to the door, is not a route out but a route in. The evacuation protocol was merely the final stage of my unwitting induction. I'm not a casualty of the door. I am a component of its continued function. The psychological breakdown, the creeping paranoia, the hallucinatory whispers, they are not symptoms of a failing mind. but the side effects of a terrible metamorphosis. If I can't leave the door, if every path leads me back to this terrible threshold, then the question gnaws at me, a relentless beast in the cage of my skull. Am I the new lock, or the thing it keeps? The seals are reformed, and my name is the last clause. Does that mean I am the final, living ward, my consciousness bound to this cursed barrier, my life force powering its continued existence? Or have I, in my desperate readings, in my arrogant probing of the forbidden, inadvertently become the entity that was meant to be contained, the essence that the door holds back? Perhaps I am both. Perhaps the thing it keeps is merely a reflection, a distorted echo of what I have become. I am tethered to this monstrosity, inextricably linked to its purpose, whatever that purpose truly is. My academic understanding, my very identity, has been devoured, twisted into something unrecognizable. My lamplight flickers, a dying gasp. The darkness presses in, no longer just an absence of light, but a palpable presence, a weight that settles on my shoulders, whispering my name. I am trapped, a scholar turned into a living footnote in a demonic text. I cannot escape this chapter, for I have written myself into its darkest pages. I know I will never see the sun again.